Pieces of furniture returned to embrace their owners, but not in the condition they had left. The municipal rats had destroyed many items and ruined others. Fatima regained her suitcase and some of her clothes. She wouldn't have cared about the missing pieces if her mother hadn't insisted she return to school the very next morning. This time, her sisters were not there to serve her as they had before. Fatima had to prepare her own clothes. She sat beside her mother, listening intently as she spoke. "We have the issue of money. How will we support ourselves from now on?" Nagla responded, "Mother, you know I'm in my final school year, and even under the best circumstances, I wouldn't have succeeded easily. Now, with things as they are and only a month left until the final exams, I'm sure I won't pass. So, I'll have to work in any job available." "Why not start now and look for work?" "You work?" "No, absolutely not." Zainab said, "Mother, I won't go to school either. I'll stay home to care for Ali and Haneen, so you can follow up with father's lawyer in peace." "This can't happen, girls. I'll work in any factory I can find, and you'll continue your studies as you should." "All right, and what about Haneen and Ali? Who will take care of them? When will you find time to chase after that lawyer who, if you don't remind him, will forget about father?" Zahir fell silent and began lamenting her bad luck, her loneliness in this calamity, and the absence of her brothers-in-law, who were unaware of their situation. But none of this helped. The problem was too overwhelming for Zahir to confront alone. In the end, the girl's suggestions were accepted. As morning slowly unveiled itself, Fatima searched for a window, hoping to see if the sun still carried the same radiant light she had always loved. But she felt that the sun had become sad, like the face of an old woman who had battled time for thousands of years without tiring. Its dim light could no longer spread across the earth with the same strength. It was defeated by a few arrogant clouds that hadn't yet decided whether they would bring rain or not. Fatima left the window and began waking up her family and preparing herself for school. Fatima found all her school supplies, but her bag was torn, her books had frayed edges, and her shoes seemed like they belonged to 100 years ago, bearing the weight of all the furniture stored in the municipal warehouses. They had forgotten their true appearance and become worn out and sad. Fatima wept as she complained to her mother, explaining the new reality. But Zahir insisted that Fatima go to school. In the end, Fatima reluctantly obeyed, going to school without socks or a coat. Fatima entered the school with a broken heart, her clothes and hair soaked by the rain. She sat in her seat, trying to pull her pants down to cover her feet so that the other girls wouldn't notice the absence of her socks. She shivered from the cold as the other students surrounded her, staring at her as if she were an alien from another planet. A few welcomed her back, and others offered words of sympathy, but most of them remained silent, looking at her with blank, uncomprehending eyes. The teacher entered the classroom, and each student returned to her seat. The teacher looked at Fatima but said nothing, as if people were afraid to speak to her, fearing that harm might befall them or that the authorities might question them. The teacher began explaining the lesson, avoiding eye contact with Fatima, but she couldn't continue ignoring her. Not when she saw Fatima shivering and trembling from the cold, or perhaps from the difficult situation she was in. The teacher sat at her desk and said, "All right, how can we help Fatima?" The girls started talking, but the teacher interrupted them and said, "Who has an extra coat at home that they can spare for Fatima?" One of the students said, "I do, teacher, but it's not new. That's fine. Fatima will only need it for these difficult days. She will have plenty of new coats in the future, God willing." "Is your house close by, Widad?" "Yes, it's right next to the school. There's just one problem left. I want you to leave the classroom and return without anyone noticing, especially the principal, and before this lesson ends. This is against the rules, but we can't just stand by and do nothing, can we? So, teacher, let me pretend I'm going to the restroom. I'll jump over the wall from there and return the same way. Is that easy for you?" "Very easy." "Then hurry, my dear." The girl dashed out, and the teacher began talking to the students about the tragedy of their people, about how the foreign world unanimously supported the presence of oppressive Jews on their land, and about the 1948 Exodus, which is how the occupation of Lydda, Jaffa, Haifa, Acre, and all those Arab Palestinian areas awaiting the return of their rightful owners came to be known. She spoke about how those lands remained steadfast, unchanging in their Arab identity, despite the presence of Jews and foreigners. Fatima's sad train of thought was interrupted by Widad's quick return to the classroom. She held out a black coat to the teacher, panting from the effort. "Here is the coat, teacher." "Thank you, Widad. Now, quickly return to your seat." The teacher handed the coat to Fatima and said, "It's good. It will help you during these cold days until you find your own coat." "Thank you, teacher, but I can't accept it." The teacher looked at Fatima in surprise, and the other girls stared at her as she continued, "Please, teacher, I don't like to be pitted. In fact, I hate being pitted." "Don't say that, Fatima. This isn't pity. It's cooperation. It's the solidarity among the Palestinian people. Don't taint this image with such words." The teacher paused for a moment, then said to Fatima in a new tone, "How often have you heard of your father's assistance to the affected families? How well known is his car in the area? Given the scarcity of cars, and because it's the only one that stops every day in front of a different house to provide the needed help. Was all of that pity?" The girls whispered softly, "Yes, he helped many people." Fatima cried bitterly as she remembered her father and how things were before their tragedy. She said, with tears streaming down her face like a river, "I can't take the coat. I'm grateful to all of you, but my mother and sisters would be ashamed of me." The teacher wiped Fatima's tears and raised her eyes toward the ceiling, trying to hide her own tears from her students. She noticed that most of them were crying too. She bit her lips, as if punishing herself for not being able to control her emotions, and said, "Take it for today, Fatima. If your mother scolds you, return it tomorrow. No one will be upset with you, I promise." Fatima wanted to end this difficult moment, so she took the coat from the teacher's hand, put it on, and sat down at her desk, wiping her tears and calming herself. The first class ended, and the teacher left the classroom, leaving Fatima to try to find some warmth in that coat to drive away the shivers that had exhausted her so she could focus during the second class. "Do you want to take the socks back?" And her friend's eyes asked, "Are you upset with me and want to return the socks?" When neither of them reacted in a way the other feared, Widad looked away from Fatima and left the classroom, saying as she passed by, "Come on, let's hurry. The break is short." Fatima returned to her seat and began to put on the first pair of socks over her frozen feet. Then she put on the second pair over them. She wished there was enough room in her shoes to wear the third pair, but she put her feet in her shoes and went out to join her friends in the schoolyard. The school day ended, and Fatima hurried home in the cold. She paused only for a moment in front of the demolished house, as if she were giving it a special greeting, then continued toward her home. When she arrived, she found her sister Zainab still sitting in bed with the two little ones. She asked her, "Are you sick?" "No, but we're freezing to death." "I almost froze to death too, if it hadn't been for a friend who brought me this coat and these socks." Fatima looked at Zainab to see how she would react to that statement. But Zainab only glanced at the coat without commenting and said, "Zahir went to bring us something to keep us warm, since the heater we had is gone along with the furniture." "What is he bringing?" "I don't know. He said something strange about his friend Fathi and then left. I think we'll be warming up like the people in the refugee camps." "Is Fathi from the camps?" "Yes, he's from Lydda. His family was displaced and scattered in 1948. Fatima smiled and shook her head, saying, "Yes, yes. Today I realized we're all relatives. We and all the people of the camps are a people destined for eviction, displacement, and death for the sake of the Jews." "The people in the camps only?" "Yes. The rest are just spectators. Let's not talk about that, Fatima, and help me clean the breadcrumbs off the bed. I had to feed Hanin in bed, as you can see." The girls remained cold hour after hour until Najla returned home. She started telling them about her new job at a pharmaceutical factory, how she had started working that morning. Then she went to the kitchen, took out a large stove that ran on kerosene, and shook it as she continued telling them about her new friends and the new manager. Zainab said, "This stove doesn't light easily. It makes a loud noise. And it's dangerous. It's better than nothing." Najla lit the stove and began to warm some bread, spreading whatever cheese or jam she could find according to her sister's preferences. Everyone now found some warmth and a bit of hot food, which seemed like a great blessing they hadn't even dreamed of in these circumstances. The sisters didn't have to wait long for Zahir to return. After about an hour and a few minutes, Zahir arrived with his friend Fathi. They were carrying a strange iron container, and each of them also carried a bag that looked heavy. Zahir, as he set down his load, said, "We made it. Thank God. The rain didn't manage to put out the fire. Thank God. All right, what do we do with this fire now, Fathi?" Fathi looked at the girls with a smile and said, "Haven't you ever seen a fire from a furnace before? Come on. Hurry up and bring a large iron pot so we can pour the fire into it." Zahir said, "Come on, Najla, what do we have here that will do?" "Why, I want to know what you're going to do. And what is this that you brought in the bags?" It's jift. It's the waste from olive pressing. And these coals you see are from the furnace in the camp." "Okay, and what are we going to do with them?" Zahir turned to Fathi and said, "Yes, what are we going to do, Fathi?" "All right, we need the iron pot so we can put the jift and the coals together. The jift will catch fire slowly, and the warmth will fill the place." Najla hesitated for a moment, then headed towards the wash basin. Najla said, "This looks good, and I don't think we have anything better." Zahir and Fathi replied in unison, "It's good. It will do the job." They placed the basin on the carpeted floor of the room, scattered the jift and coals inside it, and soon, the smell of burning would begin to spread along with a hesitant warmth that slowly seeped into their trembling bodies. But suddenly, a strange smell started to fill the air, as if something unusual was burning along with the jift. They all began asking each other, "What's that smell?" But no one could figure it out. And did it really matter as long as they had warmth? Everyone ignored the smell, but little Ali started crying and wouldn't stop, no matter what Najla did. His skin began to turn yellowish, and his lips seemed to be turning blue. Najla grew very worried and rushed to Zainab, showing her Ali. But neither of the sisters knew what to do until Zahir's mother arrived. She opened the door, immediately catching the strange smell and seeing what her children had done in her absence. She shouted at them, "What are you doing? Open the doors and windows immediately." Everyone panicked, but they had no choice but to obey her orders, and they began opening every available door and window. But it didn't stop there. Zahir's mother then turned to Zainab and cried, "Wrap Ali well and take him outside quickly." Zainab wanted to protest, but her mother's determination left no room for argument. She carried Ali outside into the gentle rain that continued to fall softly on the foreheads of Palestinians who had no choice but to endure it. Zahir's mother called out to Zahir and his friend Fathi for help in removing the basin from the house and tossing it outside. Zahir, frustrated, angrily asked his mother, "Why all this?" "It's keeping us warm." His mother realized how unaware these young ones were of the danger they were in. She contemplated punishing them, but also saw how good-hearted they were, not seeing any harm in what they were doing. She sighed as she looked into Zahir's eyes and said, "Can't you smell the burning carpet? You've burned the rug that covers the floor. Come on, let's take it outside in the rain before it keeps burning. Let's work together." Zahir looked at Fathi and said, "How did this happen? Didn't you tell me you use this fire often in your homes?" "Yes. Then, I don't know." Zahir's mother said, "Didn't you notice that the basin didn't have legs to lift it off the carpet? This heat was too intense when we moved it outside. If we had left it burning any longer, we wouldn't have been able to carry it. Zahir's mother was exhausted. She felt as if she might collapse, but the fear in her heart for her children pushed her to keep going, to find quick solutions for their worsening situation. She started issuing commands. Close the windows, leave the door open, bring Ali in from the cold, rearrange the room. Zainab, frustrated with everything going on, said, "Mother, we can't keep living like this. Why does the lawyer have to be in Jerusalem? Why do I have to be alone every day waiting for you to come back? Why do we have to stay in this house? Why don't we look for another? Why don't we even have a proper heater?" Zahir's mother, hurt by what she heard, shouted at her daughter, "Be quiet, Zainab. Do you think any of that is possible and I refused? Could I have rented a better house for a good price and I didn't? Did I find a well-known lawyer in Ramallah and turn him down? Did I lose your heater? What else? Tell me, what do you expect me to do when I have no power to change anything? I'm doing everything I can." Zahir's mother fell silent for a moment, seeing the confusion in her children's eyes. She hurried to the bedroom and pulled out an old rug from beside the wardrobe, its edges chewed by municipal rats. She quickly spread it on the floor, and Zahir and Fathi rushed to help her. Then she glanced around, trying to figure out how to make use of the fire still outside, until her eyes fell on some tiles leaning against the house's wall. "Bring me those tiles, Zahir." Zahir and Fathi jumped up and fetched the tiles. She placed them on top of the rug and said, "Now, the challenge is how to get the fire back inside." Fathi said, "Leave that to me." Fathi began rolling up the edge of the rug nearest the door until he reached the tiles Zahir's mother had placed in the middle of the rug, forming a large square big enough to hold the basin. He then fetched more tiles and scattered them over the rolled-up carpet behind the first set. He tied a strong wire around the basin and began pulling it with difficulty until it was lifted onto the scattered tiles, then rested on the central square of tiles in the middle of the rug. Zahir quickly removed the scattered tiles and unrolled the carpet. He looked up and saw that everything had been done perfectly. They now had a place to keep warm without any more problems. Zahir's mother threw herself onto a nearby chair, holding little Ali in her arms. She said, "Come, gather around me. Let's sit by the fire and talk. It's been a long time since I've heard what's going on with all of you." Everyone brightened up, and each of them found a spot to sit. Zahir even pulled his mattress from his room, spreading it out on the floor near the stove, saying, "This is better than chairs. Let's all sit here, and everyone can bring a pillow to prop behind their backs." Fathi sat next to Zahir, feeling that the tension in the room needed to dissipate. Something had to be done about it. Just then, Zahir's mother spoke. "All right, now, who has any news or something they want to share with us?" Everyone remained silent. Fathi glanced around at them and then said, "All right, let me introduce myself properly then. I should stand up and do it the right way." Fathi began to rise, but Zahir's mother said, "No need to stand. Just tell us while you're sitting." Everyone burst out laughing when Fathi insisted on standing, saying, "No, really. Proper manners are proper manners. I'll introduce myself now, standing. I'm Fathi, Zahir's new friend. I'm from the Amari camp near the Amari boys' school. I live with my sick mother. I'm good at housework, and I'm also skilled at making some complicated dishes like fried eggs and fried eggplants. I like to work after school doing any job I can find. So far, unloading and loading vegetable trucks is the only job available regularly these days." No one could hold back their laughter, and Fathi continued in his humorous way, listening to their laughter while carrying on his story. "I'm from the city of lOVE, the city that has been occupied since 1948. They told me my ancestors were brave and strong. They refused to negotiate with the Jews, the British, or even King Abdullah at the time. That's why our city was called the Eighth State, as if it were its own state with a different political stance. Do you know about the Eighth State, Aunt? Have you heard of it? Everyone kept listening to Fathy, their laughter growing bit by bit. He continued, "It doesn't matter. I don't think anyone outside of lOVE has heard of it. What matters is that my ancestors didn't negotiate with anyone. Instead, they fled barefoot and naked from lOVE, leaving the city to the Jews like a peeled egg." Zahir sighed as she listened to his story and said, "No, Fathy, don't say that. We all know what happened in 1948. Massacres, slaughter, displacement, and killing. But the Arab people were forbidden to arm themselves, while the entire world was supporting the arming of the Jews. Your family sacrificed a lot to flee with their children from the danger of death and slaughter." Fathy responded, "Aunt, why flee? Didn't they die after leaving their homes?" "Yes," she replied. "Then what harm would it have done if they had died in their homes? My son, if that were the right way for people to act in times of war and death, we would have been glad to let Ali stay in his swing when the house was blown up. But that's life. Parents can't find anything more important than ensuring the safety of their children." At that point, Fatima suddenly remembered something important and said, "That's right, Mom. That's what my teacher said today. She said that we all have to sacrifice for our homeland." Zahir, with a tone of frustration in his voice, said, "How easy it is to talk. We've sacrificed, but what has your teacher sacrificed, Fatima? And what have we gained from these sacrifices except losses and misery?" Zahir said, "Maybe we've lost and suffered, but this is the only way to resist the occupation. Forget about that, Mom. We're just a family that hasn't made a move, and perhaps no one outside of our neighbors even knows what happened to us. Is that resisting the occupation? I don't know, my son. Perhaps what happened to us has ignited the hearts of many people without us realizing it. Maybe we're just the beginning. We're the beginning and the end. No, my son. There will come a day when all the people of this land will unite as one patriotic heart. I'm sure of it. Days will come when this land will burn like fire under the occupiers' feet. Personally, I don't want to be around on that day. I believe the coming days will favor the Jews." Fathy had been listening with discomfort. He sensed that this discussion was heading towards a sad, gloomy atmosphere, one that could reopen the story of the house being blown up and the tragedy of leaving it behind. So he interrupted Zahir and said, "You know, Zahir, you sound a lot like my mom when you say those things. She repeats many of the same phrases you do." "Then your mom is right," Zahir replied. "Right? Well, I searched her thoroughly and didn't find any right or wrong with her." Laughter returned to the faces of the family, gradually growing louder as they listened to Fathy say, "Why am I still standing? I'll sit down to explain what's right, Zahir." The atmosphere began to lighten up with some jokes and laughter. Warm cups of tea and sandwiches were passed around, and Zahir found herself enjoying the light-hearted stories of her children. She learned more about Fathy, which eased her mind with his good morals and how beneficial he was as a companion for her son, Zahir. She also discovered that Fathy was the unknown person who had helped Fatima the day the house was blown up and brought her and her sister, Haneen, back to safety. No one noticed the night tightening its grip outside, just as the cold had taken hold. The firewood began to cool down gradually, and drowsiness started to weigh on the eyelids of these young ones, who clung to their moments of laughter and joy as if they feared losing them. Sensing what was happening, Zahir said, "Fathy, you need to head back to your mother now. Although I'd love for you to stay the night with Zahir because I consider you just as dear as my own son. I understand that your mother is likely worried about you." "Yes, Aunt. I was just about to ask for permission to leave." Fathy stood up, gesturing to Zahir, saying, "I'll see you tomorrow at school." As he was about to leave the house, Zahir called out to him with a question. "Can I ask you for a favor, Fathy?" "Of course, Aunt. Didn't you say I'm like your son?" "Yes, but I'm not sure. I heard that in the camp we might be able to find an old heater. We could buy it and use it for warmth instead of this firewood. Is that true?" "Yes, it's true. But it's not that easy. There aren't many heaters available. I'm not sure if any are left, but I'll look for you anyway, and God willing, I'll find a suitable one. Thank you so much, my dear. Please send my regards to your mother. Fathy set off into the night, tightening his hat on his head, pulling his coat closer around his chest and neck, and disappearing into the darkness, heading home. Zahir helped his mother take the fire outside. The girls prepared the beds for sleep, and the door was securely locked. Each member of the family sought the warmth of their blankets, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. But the silence was suddenly broken by Fatima's voice asking, "Are his eyes green, Zahir?" "They're green, right?" "Who? Fathy?" Zahir replied. "Yes." Zahir's voice, breaking with laughter, reached her ears through the giggles of her sisters as he said, "Yes, Fatima, his eyes are green. Were you worried about that?" "No, but I looked at them for so long that sometimes they seemed green and other times blue. I even thought there was something wrong with my eyes." Zahir ended the conversation, saying, "Why don't you all sleep now? Tomorrow you have school. And you, Fatima, sleep and don't try to start a new conversation." "Okay, Mom. But did you find out what grade he's in?" "He's in Zahir's class." "Now, sleep." "No, Mom. He's older than Zahir." Zahir, laughing, said, "Mom, she's getting you into another conversation. Don't you notice that?" "All right, Zahir. But what grade is your friend in?" "He's only a year older than me. He's in the 9th grade now, which means he'll be leaving this middle school at the end of the year and moving on to high school." "Okay, now go to sleep. I don't want to hear another word." And so, it seemed that this night marked the beginning of a new journey, a new way of life that they had to get used to. The gatherings around the stove that Fathy had bought them from the camp became a regular occurrence, and their nights were spent together in the dim light of an old kerosene lamp that barely lit their small space. The days passed in this way, and each night, the mother would answer their questions about their father and the lawyer, though there was rarely any new information. Until one night, she said, "They've set a date for your father's trial." Everyone turned toward Zahir, and Zahir asked, "What does that mean?" "It means there will be a court session to decide your father's sentence. We'll find out then how long he will be imprisoned." Najla asked, "What does the lawyer say, Mom?" "The truth is, he says that similar sentences for people with charges like your father's haven't been less than 20 years. My God! But he assured me that he'll use every opportunity to reduce the sentence." Zahir, frustrated, got up from the gathering and said, "And can we live for 20 years like this, without our father?" Zahir, with a calm voice full of patience, said, "Sit down, Zahir, and listen to me. We don't know yet what sentence your father will receive. But I promise you that after the trial, we'll sit down together, figure things out, and come up with a good plan for our lives. You won't need anyone, and you won't have to beg for help from anyone." Zahir looked at her with a cold, unconvincing stare, then turned away and said, "I still have 4 more years of school before I finish. After that, I'll find work. For years, Mom, until I can help you. I'll leave school and start working now. I won't wait until I see the neighbors bringing us food again. I won't accept staying here, living behind fabric walls, with a well and a bucket every time we need water. I won't get used to this kerosene lamp. Mom, the Amari refugee camp is better than this place. They have electricity and water taps. Some of them even have televisions and refrigerators. And us? And US." Zahir swallowed his words along with his anger, choking on the painful thoughts lodged in his throat. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, leaving his sisters looking at their mother, unsure of what to do or say. Was Zahir right? Should they rebel against this miserable situation? Or was their mother right, and perhaps tomorrow would bring solutions to their problems and worries? Fatima broke the silence with the question, "Will we go with you to the trial, Mom?" "Unfortunately, no. Not even I am allowed to attend the trial." "Why?" "I don't know. It's a military court, according to the lawyer. He'll inform me of any updates. If there's a chance to see your father, we'll see him. When is the trial, Mom? In 3 days. The 3 days passed slowly for Zahir's family. Night and day blended together, filled with anxious thoughts and worry. Sleep escaped their eyes, and their hearts found no peace until the day of the trial arrived. That day was unexpectedly sunny, unlike the usual cold and rainy weather. Fatima dressed in her school uniform and left the house, asking her mother, "Will you be here when I return? Will we know the outcome of the trial today?" "Inshallah, my dear. Pray for your father." "I will. Goodbye, Mom." Najla hurried to work, worried about what might happen to her mother at the trial. She feared her mother wouldn't be able to bear hearing the sentence, or worse, seeing her husband in a cage surrounded by armed soldiers. All she hoped for was that this nightmare of displacement, which she felt she lived daily with her younger siblings whenever her mother left the house, would finally end. Zahir left the house as usual, but today, she left everyone in the agony of waiting. The hours dragged on for Fatima, her mind drifting away from her studies to thoughts of her father. A surge of heat coursed through her body, almost burning her chest. She sighed, thinking of the trial, and prayed for her father's safety from the cruel Jews. Then she forced herself to focus back on her notebook and what her teacher was saying. When school was over, Fatima rushed home, eager to hear news of her father. But she was surprised to find that her mother had not yet returned. Fatima ate a few bites and then said to Zainab, "I want to go to our demolished house. I want to sit there until Mom returns, and then I'll come back with her." "No. I need you to help me take care of our siblings. Would you mind if I took Haneen with me? The weather is warm today." "Okay, but make sure you watch her carefully." Fatima headed toward the piece of land that still held the remains of their blown-up house. She gazed around with sorrow and bitterness. That wall had once been the wall of her room, and those steps, now crumbled on top of each other as if exhausted by the passage of time, were once majestic steps. She had walked up and down them hundreds of times like a princess, unburdened by the hardships of life. Fatima paused for a moment, unsure whether to turn back or run to her sorrowful home and kiss every precious stone. She set Haneen down gently and was overtaken by a slight tremor that quickly grew stronger as she looked at the ruins of the house. Without realizing it, Fatima began to cry. Her sobs grew louder and louder until she could no longer contain herself, and she started calling out for her father, her voice choking in her throat, saying, "Father, come back. Father, return to us and see what has happened to us since you left." Haneen was startled by Fatima's sobbing and began crying in fear. Fatima noticed her, wiped her eyes, and crouched down to pick up her sister, saying, "I envy you, Haneen. You don't understand anything that's happening. All you want is to play and laugh." Fatima carried Haneen and began walking around the ruins of the house. She couldn't stop the memories from flooding into her small mind, adding to her grief. Fatima stayed like this until she grew tired. She sat on a comfortable stone and placed Haneen beside her, saying, "Let's wait for Mom here. She should be back soon. It's been a long time since she left." A voice from behind her said, "Has she not returned yet?" Fatima's body jolted in fear, but she quickly recognized the voice and realized it was Fathi. She gathered her breath and asked, "You scared me. What are you doing here?" "I'm waiting for Zahir. He promised to meet me here and update me on what happened at your father's trial." Fathi gazed into Fatima's eyes and asked, "Have you been crying?" "A little. Give me Haneen and come with me. Let's walk around until Zahir or your mother arrives." Fathi took Haneen in his arms, and Fatima began to feel some relief. But the sorrow she felt from seeing the ruins of her home made her sigh and pour out her pain to Fathi. She said, "Look at this land. Look at the trees. All these 3 dunams. This is our land. Do you see those trees? I'll tell you their story. Every time my father had a new child, He would plant a cypress tree next to the house wall, as you can see. That big tree is Najla's, and beside it is Zainab's tree. And this tree, which is almost as tall as the other two, is Zahir's. Let me continue. This is your tree. And these little saplings are for Haneen and Ali. Yes, that's right. My father always said, the real fence that will protect this house is all of you. But look, no one could protect that sad house. Fathi disliked the sadness in Fatima's voice and wanted to cheer her up. So he said, but your house has become the most famous house in the area. Everyone is talking about it today, even though no one would notice any other house, no matter how much it's demolished and rebuilt. Don't mock me. That small sentence from Fatima struck Fathi like a sharp dagger. He realized she wouldn't tolerate any joking about this topic. Then she said to him, come, I'll show you the well. My father built it, and out of fear that we might fall into it, he raised it more than a meter above the ground and gave it a roof like a room. The spacious. I used to love sitting on it and playing. Fatima didn't notice the sun beginning to hide behind the black clouds, nor did she feel the cold returning and intensifying as she moved between the ruins. It wasn't until some raindrops started falling on her face that Fathi asked, do you want to go back home? No, I want to wait for my mother. Are you cold? No. Then why are you shivering? Do you want me to teach you a trick to keep the cold from touching you in the winter? Is that possible? Of course it is. Just open your arms to the raindrops. Let them fall wherever they please without resistance or complaint. Try to feel their coldness as it caresses your face and wets your hair. Welcome the rain with happiness and joy. Spin around with your arms wide open, and you'll see the world from every angle. Look up to see the rain falling eagerly into your arms and your embrace. Rain loves those who love it. So, love it. Fathi placed Haneen under the shadow of a demolished wall, opened his arms to the rain, and began spinning around, laughing as the increasing rain splashed on his face. Fatima opened her arms and began to imitate him. Soon, she discovered that the feeling of the cold rain wasn't bad at all. Rather, it was a new sensation that made her feel like the master of the world, as if every raindrop was celebrating her. She looked up toward the sky while spinning happily, watching the raindrops race to fall into her arms. Her laughter grew louder as her breathing quickened. She no longer felt cold, nor did she feel her skin tightening. Her perception of the world changed. The rain now had the warmth of a summer breeze, and its winds played sweet melodies. She wanted to keep enjoying those melodies, but then a strange voice interrupted her ears, saying, You, what are you doing here? Fathi stopped spinning and Fatima stopped as well. They looked toward the voice and were both greatly upset when they saw a patrol of occupation soldiers standing on the road across from them. One of the soldiers stood there arguing and shouting, Why are you here? This land is confiscated. You are not allowed to be here. It belongs to the Israeli army. You need to leave immediately. Fatima shouted, This is our land. This is our home. No, it's our land now. Leave it at once. I'll be back soon, and I don't want to find you here. Do you understand? The army vehicle drove away, and Fathi quickly picked up Haneen, saying, Come on, I'll take you back home. Fathi hurried toward Zahir's house, carrying Haneen and covering her head with his hand like an umbrella to protect her from as much rain as he could. He looked at her to playfully tease her, fearing that she might start crying at any moment, something she seemed ready to do whenever she gazed at his face. Finally, they reached the house, and he knocked on the door. Zahir opened the door, surprised, and said, Fathi, where have you been? Come in. Hurry. Come inside. You're asking me where I've been. Where were you? Fatima pushed past Fathi and hurried to her room. She began drying her hair with a towel, raising her voice in anger as she asked, Hasn't Mom come back yet? No. I want to tell her what happened today. Zahir sensed something concerning in Fatima's words. He looked at her and said, "Can't you tell me? What's going on, Fatima? Why are you so angry?" Fatima threw the towel on the bed and shouted, "They kicked us out of our land. They said it's theirs." "Who are you talking about? Who told you that?" Translation: It's the Israeli army, Zahir. Fatima began crying as she continued speaking. "The soldier told us that the land is now theirs and that we are not allowed to be there. It's our land, Zahir, isn't it?" Zahir was filled with rage. His veins bulged with anger as he said, "And where are they now? Did they enter our land? I'm going to them." Zahir stormed toward the door, trying to open it, but Fathi quickly grabbed him, saying, "They'll shoot you, you madman. Let them, then. I'm going, and whatever happens, happens." "Calm down, Zahir, think clearly. Calm down for your mother who hasn't returned yet, for your sister who is terrified of what happened, for Haneen who is crying and no one is listening to her. Come, sit down. If what you're about to do would help, I would go with you, but this isn't the right time. Let's sit and think about what we can do." "Do what?" "I have a project in mind that I want to propose to your mother, but first, I need to see that room." Zahir looked in the direction Fathi pointed and shifted uncomfortably in his seat for a moment before saying, "It's the guest room." "What about it? Do you use it? I mean, do many guests visit you?" "No." "Then the project will work. Here comes your mother now." Zahir entered the house, greeted them, and then looked at her children as she moved toward the fireplace. "Why haven't you lit the fire? It's getting colder outside." Zainab quickly went to light the fire in silence, as if she wanted to finish the task to hear the more important news from her mother. When her mother didn't speak, Zahir asked, "What happened, mother? What was the verdict on father?" Zahir swallowed hard before saying, "They sentenced him to 6 years in prison." Zahir slammed his hand against the wall and said, 6 years? 6 years, mother? How are we going to live like this for 6 years?" Zainab began crying as she said, "Wasn't it enough for them that they demolished the house and confiscated the land? What do they want from us? Don't they know that he is our only provider?" Zahir sighed as she sat near the fireplace and said, "God is our sufficiency and the best disposer of affairs." The lawyer said that this sentence was lightened due to the demolition of the house, the lack of a provider for the children, and the injury your father sustained when they broke his leg during torture. He said the actual sentence that was initially proposed was 25 years, which they call a life sentence in Israeli courts. Zahir was silent for a while before asking, "Where is Ali? But where will I get the money for the goods, Zahir?" Zahir looked at Fathi, who said, "We don't need money for the goods, Aunt. I mean, the distributor will bring the products and give you an invoice with their cost. After some time, he'll come back to collect a portion of the payment and see what's sold out so he can supply you with more. That way, eventually, all the goods will be paid for." No, that's unacceptable. If we are going to work on this project, we need to have at least some starting capital. I don't like the idea of men coming to my house repeatedly to ask for money. That's difficult and it has many implications for us. We won't let that happen. "Well, mother, what's the solution now after everything we've discussed?" Fathi spoke in a low voice. "There is a solution," Zahir exclaimed. "You say there's a solution. Speak up and tell us." "It's, with your permission, Aunt, it's the car that's parked outside. I see that it will sit idle for 6 years until Abu Zahir returns, which means it will lose its value and turn into rusted metal. We can avoid that by selling it and using the money." Fathi fell silent after explaining his point. He didn't feel the need to say anything more and began looking into Zahir's eyes at times and his mother's at others, waiting for any comment on his suggestion. Finally, Zahir said, "Praise be to God, the Lord of all worlds, who sent you to us, Fathi." She approached him, gently patting his hair affectionately, and continued, "I bear witness before God that from today you are like a son to me and a brother to Zahir. You have the right to look into our affairs, advise us, and make suggestions. You are a man despite your young age, my son. Therefore, I will leave the selling of the car and the opening of the grocery store in your and Zahir's hands. I thank God that he has blessed me with 2 young men in this difficult time. Zahir calmly headed towards the kitchen to prepare lunch. Zahir looked at Fathi and asked, "What should we do now, brother?" "Don't worry. Come with me. There are people interested in buying the car." Just a few days later, Zahir's grocery store began welcoming customers. She became adept at handling the men who brought her supplies, and it wasn't difficult for her to manage this along with caring for her children, her family, and visiting her husband. Fatima watched these developments without participating in them. Most of the time, she would retreat to a corner of the well with her sister Haneen to observe what was happening. Meanwhile, Najla and Zainab were Zahir's right hands in everything. Fatima often took advantage of their preoccupations to sneak away to her demolished home, where she would sit, cry, and reminisce about the grandeur of that palace and the serenity of her former life. Frequently, Fatima returned from those ruins with a renewed sense of strength and determination to reclaim what was lost, despite the warnings from the soldiers about being in that land. One day, as the school year was nearing its end, Fatima hurried back home only to be shocked by the presence of army personnel in front of her demolished house. As she approached and looked around to understand what was happening, she saw giant bulldozers and Israeli trucks carrying away the debris from the bulldozers, transporting it to an unknown location. Fatima screamed and ran towards the house recklessly, getting closer until she almost crossed the patrols. The soldiers grabbed her and insisted on removing her from the site. She threw herself in front of a truck, screaming, "This is our house. Why are you demolishing it? Leave it. It's our home." Suddenly, one of the soldiers grabbed her by her clothes, dragged her toward the road, and threw her into the street. He raised his rifle at her, threatening her against attempting any action, even just standing up, and said, "Your house. Be quiet and just watch. It is no longer your house." The bulldozers began clearing the land of the remnants of the demolished house. Fatima's eyes absorbed every clump of stones and embraced every bit of brick with sadness and pain. By the time the bulldozers had finished demolishing the entire house, Fatima thought it was over. But the bulldozer driver, with a sneering grin on his face, maneuvered his machine closer to Fatima. He then reversed the bulldozer frenetically, uprooting the cypress trees that were lined around the house. Fatima's vision narrowed, and her words died. Her breath almost stopped as she saw the bulldozer begin to uproot the small shrubs, throwing them into the enemy's trucks like trash to be discarded out of sight. The bulldozer driver kept glancing at her with that mocking look from time to time, which ignited in her a spirit of defiance and resistance. Despite nearly collapsing, and after enduring stomach pains and dizziness, she steadied herself. She met the driver's mocking gaze with a fierce look in her eyes, showing him her resolve despite everything he was doing to her home and trees. She did not scream or cry but stood up, ignoring the soldiers around her, brushed off her clothes calmly, grabbed her bag, and prepared to leave. Her father's words still echoed in her mind. "You are the wall of this house, and no one will uproot you." Fatima began to walk away with small steps, not wanting to look back. There was nothing left to see except grim faces and predatory eyes she had no desire to see. Suddenly, she noticed the soldiers shouting, and it seemed a fight had broken out among them. Fatima looked to see what was happening and was astonished to see the bulldozer driver struggling to uproot one of the larger trees. It was Najla's tree. It refused to bend or be uprooted. The soldiers realized there was no point in spending the day trying to uproot these deeply rooted trees, but the driver was stubborn, repeatedly hitting the tree to no avail. This irritated the soldiers, who yelled at him to stop. Here, Fatima stood in the road, raised her chin with her usual pride, lifted her head, and looked at the driver with the victorious gaze of a princess. Then she turned calmly and walked the path she had taken until she reached home, leaving behind a driver whose hatred and malice were palpable. Fatima arrived home and opened the door to find some neighbors chatting with her mother. She thought they must have heard about the house and merely greeted them before heading to her room. However, Zahir noticed her daughter's disheveled appearance and dirty clothes and asked, "What happened, Fatima? Why are your clothes dirty? Did you fight with someone?" Fatima realized that her mother hadn't heard the news yet and that the ruins taken away by the Jewish trucks had departed in silence. They had been taken to an unknown place, stealing from her all the sweet memories and warm feelings she had. Fatima sadly answered her mother, "No, I didn't fight with anyone. Did you fall then? What happened to you?" "Nothing." The neighbors excused themselves and left with their purchases from the grocery store. Zahir approached Fatima with suspicion and concern in her eyes, asking again, "Now that the neighbors have left, what happened to you to make you come in this state?" Before Fatima could answer her mother, Zahir burst into the house eagerly, calling out, "Mother, mother, did you hear? The Jews have razed our house to the ground." "What are you saying?" "Here," Fatima cried out as if reproaching her mother, blaming her with deep pain. "Yes, they demolished it. They carried it away with their trucks, leaving not a single stone on the ground." Fatima began to cry again and continued, "Father promised me he wouldn't let anyone destroy the house. He promised. They destroyed it and razed it. Even the cypress trees he had planted, they uprooted them just as they uprooted us." Zahir remained stunned, not knowing how to respond, and tears began to silently stream down her cheeks. Zahir approached Fatima, seeing his mother collapsing onto the bed in silence, and said, "Calm down, Fatima. Come to me, my dear." With great tenderness, Zahir embraced his sister for the first time since they had faced that ordeal, feeling her head and playing with her hair, which was wet with her tears. He noticed her pain, as she had been pampered to the point where everyone thought she was her father's princess. He said, "Don't cry, Fatima. It's okay. We forgot what happened and suddenly made you an adult, responsible for your sister and for getting through what you're going through with equal strength. We've placed a burden on you beyond your capacity. Forgive us, my precious princess." They razed the house. I used to love playing near it and befriending its stones. They razed it and that's that. So hold on, my dear. I promise we'll rebuild it. They've cleared the mess they caused, so we can rebuild the house as we wish. Isn't that right? You know they are confiscating the land. We'll find a solution. You know we are not people who give up. And our trees, they uprooted them. Yes, they uprooted the small and weak trees, but the large ones, they will never be able to uproot. Zahir wiped his tears and began to dry his sister's tears, holding her face tenderly, and said, "Do you understand the meaning, Fatima? Strong trees are difficult to uproot, so be a strong tree, Fatima. Plant your roots firmly in the ground, and no one will ever be able to uproot you." They pushed me to the ground. The soldier pointed his gun at my face for more than an hour while I sat motionless. At this moment, Zahir turned and could no longer hold back her tears. She hugged her two children tightly and said, "So, this is what happened, my little one. Oh, my heart aches. You have suffered so much, little one. But I promise you, things will get better." Zahir pulled away slightly from his mother's embrace and said, "I am no longer a child who cries in your arms, mother. We all grew 100 years older through this experience." Then he teased Fatima, saying, "Do you know who's sitting outside? It's Fathi, the one with the green eyes." Fatima smiled and said, "Don't you dare tell him that I asked about the color of his eyes." Zahir laughed and said, "I won't tell him, but why don't you wash your face and come help us? We've got some goods for the grocery store." Zahir headed towards the open door and saw Fathi sitting on the edge of the brick outside the house. It was clear that he had heard everything and was affected by it. He then said, as if wanting to finish quickly, "You go inside to the grocery window, Zahir, and I'll hand you the goods from outside. Then I'll return with the cart to the camp right away." Zahir understood from Fathi's tone that he was also upset about what was happening. So he quietly went to the grocery window and started unloading the goods in silence. This allowed them to hear Fatima suddenly raising her voice, saying, "Don't promise me anything, please, mother. My father promised me before you, and I believed him. I don't want you to promise me so that I believe it again. But I'm serious, Fatima. I will rebuild the house no matter what it takes. You won't be able to. Then, I promise you that I will keep trying as long as I live. Will that satisfy you?" Fatima covered her ears and left the house, heading to the well's courtyard. She didn't know where to go. She was surprised to find Fathi standing in front of her. So she sat on the edge of the closed well as if searching for something to pour her anger onto. Fathi sat next to her and said, "Why are you angry with your mother? She's promising you something good." "I don't want her to promise me. My father promised me before, and he was very confident in his promise, but he couldn't keep it." "Yes, but women are more truthful than men. If they promise, they fulfill it. Don't you know that?" Fatima looked at Fathi in surprise and almost laughed at his words. But then she remembered that he was talking about her father. She looked away at the ground, sighed, and said, "My father was more capable than my mother of keeping his promise." "Yes, but your father fell victim to another man who he trusted." "A victim of another man? How so?" "Well, I'll tell you why your father was imprisoned and why he couldn't keep his promise. I don't know why, but we thought these details didn't matter to you. We were wrong. I'll tell you now. Know, Fatima, that your father was a hero, a patriotic man. He wanted to contribute, even if just a little, for this country. I don't know how he started helping the Fedayeen, but he began receiving from them what they could smuggle across the Jordanian border, arms, and then he would deliver them to members of the Fedayeen who intended to carry out operations inside Israel, as they call it now. The important thing, unfortunately, the man who mediated between your father and the Fedayeen constantly carried a list with your father's name and the number of arms to be received, and so on. After some time, news of that man's death reached your father, and he no longer knew what to do with the arms in his possession or how to distribute them without instructions from that man. So, your father decided to bury the arms in the ground of the house and forget about it. He couldn't trust any other man who might ask him about the arms, whoever that man might be. The situation was dangerous, and the Jews were closely monitoring movements along the borders. One day, a man came and claimed that he was sent by the Fedayeen and that he wanted to receive a batch of arms. Your father denied everything and drove the man away harshly. The man left, threatening, "You'll regret this, Abu Zahir, you'll regret this." Your mother knew this entire story and witnessed it. She knew that your father did what he did to keep his promise to you and to protect the house. The important thing is that after your father was arrested and the arms were confiscated and the situation was over, certain matters were revealed to the defense lawyer. As a result, your mother was informed that the trusted man who dealt with your father was not dead, but had been captured while trying to smuggle some arms. Of course, the list with your father's name and the amount of arms he had was found. It turned out that the second man your father drove away was none other than an Israeli intelligence officer who wanted to trap your father in a weapons handover operation before he was captured. We later learned that the lawyer used this information to prove that your father did not collaborate with the Fedayeen and did not cause any harm to the state of Israel. That's what happened. Now, do you understand that your father was a victim of that man's irresponsible actions? Yes. How did you know this story? It seems, Fatima, that you have been absent a lot from your family, sneaking off to play among the ruins of the bombed house, so you didn't know anything about this story. I suppose so. So what? Have you forgiven your father? He tried to keep his promise. But I still hate it when someone promises me something. Shall I tell you a secret? Fatima looked at Fathi silently. She didn't want to talk, but her curiosity kept her from saying no, so she stayed silent and lowered her gaze. Fathi then said, Shall I tell you the real reason for my friendship with Zahir? Fatima remained silent, so Fathi continued. Well, I was young then, maybe around 10 years old, about the same age as you are now when I first saw your house. My father, may God have mercy on him, was taking me to the house of a shepherd who lived just a little past your house. I think you know him. He lives in the mountain behind you and raises a flock of sheep and goats. I know him, he's Abu Atta. Exactly. We went there that day to buy a small lamb at my insistence, of course. And what happened was that when my father saw your house, he stopped in front of it for a moment and sighed. Then he took my hand and walked with me, saying, Our house in Lida looked like this one, Fathi. I had just started building the upper floor and hadn't finished. I think it would have been as beautiful as this house if it had been completed. Then the war happened, and what happened, happened. I was listening to my father that day, not fully comprehending everything he was saying. But I knew he loved your house and that, if it weren't for the war, the 1948 war, I would have had a house like it instead of that one crouching in the camp. The important thing, my dear, is that I grew up watching your house as if it were ours. I grew to love buying a sheep every year just to take it to graze near your house. I would see your father, and sometimes I would greet him. He would respond with the most beautiful and kind words, smiling, and often asking if I needed anything. I would thank him and continue on my way. One day, your father called me over and said, Boy, I have placed a water jar here at the entrance of the house. A clay jar. Do you know it, Fatima? Yes, I remember it, I replied. He said, I placed it here especially for you and for all passers-by, so we could drink whenever we needed. That day in particular, Fatima, I heard you call him, and I heard him respond, At your service, my lady. I laughed so much that day, and I wanted to know the story behind that phrase. I started passing by your house more and more often until I memorized your image. Holding the edge of your dress, descending the stairs with grandeur and pride like a princess. For a moment, I almost believed that you were a real princess, perhaps kidnapped by Abu Zahir for some reason. Fatima laughed out loud as she saw Fathi trying to imitate her royal walk, saying, Indeed, it's a princess's walk, but maybe a princess from the Stone Age. Today's princesses don't have a distinguished walk. Fathi sat back down next to Fatima and said, So, you're your father's princess? Yes, she replied. If that's the case, then why all the yelling and crying all the time? Why do you bring sadness to your mother on every occasion? Princess. Fatima was silent for a moment, then asked him, Do you think I'm wrong in all my actions? Not all of them. Let's say most of them. Maybe you forget every now and then that every member of this family is suffering just like you and doesn't have the space to endure more. That's true. I was scared when they moved the ruins of the house, that we would forget it over time and forget its unique majesty atop the hill. You'll never forget it. Fatima, I'm sure there are many pictures of it. You can keep them, my lady. Fatima laughed and stood up, saying, You are a good friend, Fathi. I'll go ask my mother about those pictures. Yes, I am a good friend, my lady. And by the way, my eyes are green. Fatima and Fathi burst into laughter again, and Fathi headed towards his cart to pull it and set off back to the camp. Zahir was behind the grocery store window, listening to everything that was happening between Fatima and Fathi. She saw her daughter enter the house with a different expression than the one she left with. She saw Zahir leave quickly behind Fathi, his voice trailing behind, I'll be back in a little while, mother. Fatima entered the house quickly and started searching for the family's photos. Zahir approached her and said, Do you want to go with me to visit your father in prison? We've been allowed to visit him in 10 days. Fatima looked at her mother and said, Mother, I feel strange things when I imagine my father behind bars. Can you understand that? I feel like I can't bear to see soldiers surrounding him, ordering him around. Think about it, Fatima. Your father will be happy to see you, I'm sure of it. Mother, my stomach is starting to hurt again. I feel nauseous and like vomiting whenever I try to think about it. All right, my dear. We'll leave the matter for another time then. The 10 days passed quietly in Zahir's house, and the date of the first visit came, then the second and the third. Each time, Fatima's pain and nausea would return whenever she thought about going to the prison to visit her father, until Zahir was convinced that the matter should be left for a longer period, hoping that Fatima would overcome her condition. Months turned into years, and 3 years passed before Fatima agreed to visit her father. Often, she would content herself with reading his monthly letters that came from the prison, which usually contained the same words and phrases. Each time, she wished she could read a sentence where he asked specifically about her. But it seemed that the phrase "greetings to all the children" was enough. Asking about each person individually would have filled the small letter, headed in Hebrew and stamped with their seal. This time, Fatima held the letter and wanted to read it aloud to her mother, as usual. She headed towards the well, searching for her after realizing that she wasn't in the house. But she was greatly alarmed when she found her mother leaning against the wall, struggling to reach the door of the house, almost fainting from dizziness. Fatima hurried to her, holding her, saying, "What's wrong, mother? Let me help you sit on this chair." "I'm fine. Get me a blood pressure pill from my bag." Fatima quickly went to the cupboard, took out her mother's handbag, pulled out the medicine, filled a glass of water, and rushed back to her mother, saying, "Mother, what happened to make your blood pressure rise like this? I know something happened, so tell me what's wrong." "Nothing, Fatima." "Mother, for the past 3 years, your blood pressure only rises to this level when something deeply upsets you. So what happened today?" "I think you're right. Your uncle told me when he visited us this morning that the appeal case has failed." "The appeal case, mother? Haven't you given up yet? You keep submitting appeal after appeal, and the Jews reject it every time." "I want to get the land back, Fatima." "We don't need the land, mother. Not if it costs you your health." "Don't worry, Fatima. I'll feel better now that I've taken the medicine." "Mother, please forget about the land. 3 years have passed, and 3 more will pass, and then father will get out and handle it." 3 more years, Fatima. Don't say that. We want the land even if it kills us. We won't wait as long as we can do something, right? Zahir slowly got up from the chair and said, "Help me to bed. I want to sleep a little. And when I wake up, I want to find all of you ready to go with me to the photo studio." "Why the studio, mother?" "Your uncle told me that the lawyer mentioned that pictures of you with the appeal might give the case more strength." "Another appeal, mother? Another, and another and another, Fatima. Get Hanin and Ali ready and send for Zahir." "Do you understand, Fatima?" "As you wish, mother." About 2 hours later, everyone was at the studio's door. Zahir had gone inside to discuss with the photographer how she wanted the picture of her children to be taken. Everyone entered the studio, and the photographer began arranging their positions in front of the camera, saying, "So, this photo is for the military governor?" "Yes." "And will you be taking it to him yourself?" "No, I'll send it to the lawyer, who will present it to the military governor along with the petition." "Listen, sister, I want to give you some advice. As you can see, I meet many people and hear many stories. Go ahead. I know for sure that the military governors hate it when lawyers come to them. They take pleasure in rejecting their requests. But I've heard stories about people like you who requested to see the military governor personally without a lawyer and asked for what you call a petition. They succeeded more often than the lawyers do. But I don't know how to approach him alone, nor do I know where to find him. You'll find him at the Army headquarters in the military center adjacent to the Ramallah prison. And do you think they'll allow me to meet him? You won't lose anything by trying, right?" "Yes, that's true. So, I'll do my best to have these photos ready today. If you send your son to me by 7 in the morning tomorrow, I'll have them prepared so you don't waste the day and can go to meet the military governor at 8 when his official hours start." "Let's rely on God then." "We rely on God." The next day, As the sun was busy checking on the world under its wing after chasing away the night at dawn, Zahir was preparing herself to go meet the military governor. And indeed, before the clock struck 8 in the morning, Zahir had already taken the photos of her children and was standing at the gate of the Israeli military center, asking the guard to allow her to meet the governor. But the guard firmly refused her request. The more she pleaded and begged him, the more stubborn and insistent he became. Zahir began to show the guard her children's photos, hoping he would have mercy on her situation, and she tried to convince him of the importance of this meeting. But he replied, "If you had come on any other day, the military governor is preparing himself and his belongings to leave this area today. A new military governor will be taking his place." Zahir almost went mad, nearly breaking into tears as she begged the guard not to deny her the chance to meet him before he leaves. The new military governor doesn't know about her previous petitions and won't be influenced by them as much as this governor might. The guard, beginning to soften towards her, said, "Listen, woman, I'll go in and ask him if he'll agree to see you. That's all I can do for you." Zahir didn't dare sneak in behind him and enter the military governor's office without permission, even though her instincts urged her to do so. She waited at the gate. The guard returned and said, "He refused, woman. Now go away. Please, let me see him for just 5 minutes. How can I let you in when he's refused? You said he's leaving now, didn't you?" "Yes." "Then he can't do anything to you or me if I enter without permission." The soldier laughed at her words, and Zahir seized the moment, quickly heading towards the military governor's office, taking advantage of the guard's hesitation to stop her. He quickly followed her to throw her out. Zahir opened the office door quickly and entered, saying, "Please, governor, don't let him throw me out before I speak to you." The military governor was stunned by Zahir's sudden entrance. Her tears and her pale face filled with pain and determination. Out of curiosity, he said to her, "Quickly, what do you want?" "Governor, you imprisoned my husband. I'm not asking for his release. You demolished my house, and I'm not asking for it back either. But I am a woman cut off from her roots, as the saying goes. I have no one but these children. None of them can support or help me, and I can't afford to rent a home to shelter them, nor do I have food to feed them. As you can see, I am a sick woman. Get to the point. What do you want?" "I want permission to use the land, just to set up a tent for my children before the neighbor throws me out of the ruined house we're living in." The governor looked at Zahir's face for a moment, then glanced at the photos of her children and said, "But the land belongs to the government, not me, Zahir. So, you know me, and I know all your children. We have photos of them and reports on all of you. Then you know I'm telling the truth. Yes, and I would have preferred if you were lying so I could throw you out. Please, I've sent you many petitions. You hold my fate in your hands, at least for now. Soon, my fate will be in the hands of a governor who doesn't know me. Please help me before you leave." The military governor was silent for a moment, then looked out of his window to see the military vehicles bringing in the new governor. He knew there was no time to think, so he said, "All right, you've won." He moved towards his desk drawer, pulled out a special file, took out some papers and began signing them. He called out loudly in Hebrew to the guard, then said to him, "Take this woman out of here." He then said to Zahir, "You can use your land. I'll complete the paperwork with the new governor, so don't worry." Zahir felt that when she heard the soldier's words, all her senses had stopped functioning. She couldn't hear any sound after that sentence, as if those words had lodged themselves in her ears and refused to leave. She started walking towards the street, not thinking about the directions she was taking, not seeing where she was going. Sometimes she cried over the humiliation of begging that military governor, and other times she smiled at the thought of telling Fatima that she had managed to keep her promise and reclaimed the land. Zahir remained in this state until her eyes fell upon her land, and she recognized that she had reached it. Suddenly, All her senses awakened, and she entered the land, kissing its soil and stones, embracing its trees, and calling out to every passerby, "I have reclaimed my land." Zahir reached home, opened the door, and said, "Good news! Good news!" The children gathered around her, and none of them dared to guess what the news was until Zainab asked, "What is it, mother? Is it?" "Yes, we have regained the land." Everyone shouted with joy, and Fatima rushed to her mother, kissing her out of sheer happiness, tears filling her face. She said, "Mother, you are the best mother on the face of the earth. I want you to ask me for anything, and I will do it for you just as you did this for us." "What do you ask of me, mother? Are you sure, Fatima? May I ask?" "Yes." "Then, you will accompany me to visit your father." Create realistic old painting style of a powerful and emotional scene that captures the moment when Zahir stands on the side of the road, getting out of the car in front of her demolished house, looking at it with anguish, an elderly woman with faded features. The scene is a sunlit rural landscape with earthy tones, where Zahir appears shocked, tears streaming down her face, as she sees her house demolished before her eyes, the remains of stones and small trees scattered before her, destruction and sadness over the demolished house. Her modest clothes and headscarf flutter slightly in the breeze, expressing the hardship she has endured. In the background, her children appear in the distance, rushing towards her with sad expressions. The sky is clear, and the early morning sunlight casts a warm golden shadow on the scene, emphasizing the moment of victory and emotional release. The overall mood should convey a mixture of deep sadness and attachment to the land that drives the story. The title of the story, Forbidden Love, should be subtly incorporated into the landscape, perhaps by being carved into the soil or stones in a natural, unobtrusive way.